Hello housing enthusiasts and welcome to HGXIV's Break It Down video guide series. In this video we will demonstrate how to build one style of wallpapered accent wall. Everything you need is listed there on the screen. To start, make sure you are on the floor below where you want to build this accent wall. We will be floating partitions up through the ceiling. Begin by placing the blank Riviera partition with grid snap and apply the wallpaper you wish to use. Again with grid snap, place a white rectangular partition on the blank partition. You can see how they naturally line up here. Now, turn off grid snap and carefully move the blank partition forward until it is just barely behind the white rectangular. Now, we'll place a stage panel and rotate it perpendicular to our partitions. Move it so it's just off-center of the partitions. Turn off grid snap and loft both partitions at once using the Loft Anything glitch. As a reminder, this is done by taking a Riviera wall shelf out of your inventory and placing it under the center of the furniture's hitbox and quickly hitting Escape to exit the housing menu. When it jumps up, you return the Riviera wall shelf to your inventory and rinse repeat. We've sped up this part so as not to bore you to death. Halfway up, we stop to measure for the location of the optional marble baseboard by lining up a marble partition with the lofted partitions so only the marble trim shows. Then, we continue to loft the first two partitions up through the ceiling. Upstairs, we'll check our progress and rotate the white rectangular partition to lock it in place before continuing to loft the blank Riviera partition. You can see that the blank partition can be lofted in bigger jumps than the white rectangular partition, which makes this process go faster in real time. Once we've lofted the blank Riviera partition up high enough for the trim to be partially in the ceiling, we'll rotate it to lock it in place and then begin lofting the marble partition. The marble partition doesn't need to go up far, just 4 grid snap loft jumps for the top trim to be visible as the accent wall's baseboard. Rotate it to lock it in place, and then we'll pick up our stage panel and move upstairs to continue. Now, we'll make marble crown molding by placing a second marble partition with grid snap on our partitions, and a third marble partition 1 grid snap in front of the second. Line up your perpendicular stage panel just off center of the marble partitions and loft them up. The second marble partition will be rotated and locked into a lower position than the third to create the stepped crown trim. Now, we'll run outside to reset the second marble partition back to its lower position. Next, we'll place the white rectangular partitions with grid snap to either side of our accent wall, just so you can see how we'll be boxing it all in. To make the picture frame trim, we'll place white rectangular partitions, all dyed different colors for ease of explaining, rotated at an angle so that you can see only the corner of the partition is seen when placed behind the blank Riviera partition. You can make these lines as thick or as thin as you like, but try to make them look even and uniform. In order to find the correct spacing for them, we'll place a wooden showcase turned on its side on a Riviera wall shelf and move it between two of our lines in order to properly measure their distance apart. You just want the bottom line of the wooden showcase to peek through the partition, and ideally you'll want it aligned with the wallpaper pattern that you want to show through. Now we'll begin the crazy process of lofting these 6 angled white rectangular partitions. Make sure that your stage panel is off-center of the white rectangular partitions hitboxes. Then, begin to loft them carefully with your Riviera wall shelf. You don't have to go very high. You can see we went a little too high and the white rectangular partitions hit the crown molding, so we brought them back down using the same process as lofting, but in reverse. Rotate the partitions that got lofted to lock them in place, and start lofting on the other side. This part is crazy, and though we've sped it up for the sake of video length, you can feel free to adjust the playback speed to watch Rhapsody, that's me, struggle at slower speeds. The key is to get them all lofted and rotated in the middle of the blank Riviera partition and all at roughly the same height. Next, we'll place another white rectangular partition, this one rotated to be perpendicular to our accent wall. We are going to use more like this to fill in the space between the picture frame trim lines. The trick here is to make sure that all the flat surfaces are flush with the first white rectangular partition we placed, the gray one there at the bottom. We want to create an illusion of all these being one single wall. Place 2 additional white rectangular partitions to either side of the accent wall. Grid Snap will help us get these close to closing the gaps, but now we have to turn off Grid Snap and carefully inch these partitions over to reach the picture frame trim edge. To fill in the space between the wallpaper accents, we'll need 4 white rectangular partitions per gap, and these are the ones that are turned perpendicular, so we're only using the narrow edge. Once again, we've dyed these all different colors so they're easier to identify in the guide. So here you can see in each spot there are 4 white rectangular partitions. More on this mess later. Next, we're going to loft one of each of the white rectangular partitions on the sides real quick and run outside to let the unrotated ones float back down. It's worth noting that the texture glitching of the partitions dyed differently is a sign that they're about as closely overlapped as you can make them. Those sides are done, so we'll remove the dye to stop the texture glitching. Now for the fun part. We're going to line up each of these narrow ends of the white rectangular partitions between the frames so they are flush with the bottom white rectangular partition. Put your patience pants on. For the sake of clarity, we'll move a couple of these out of the way for now. For tiny movements like this, we recommend zooming in and adjusting the DPI or sensitivity on your mouse. Just like with the sidewalls, we want to loft 2 of the 4 partitions in these gaps in order to fill the space from the floor to the crown molding. Again, we'll place our stage panel just off center and use a Riviera wall shelf to loft the white rectangular partitions. The tricky part here is lofting around all the angled partitions that make up the trim, but the most important thing is to remember that once something is rotated, it's locked in that position even if you accidentally catch it in another loft process. If things get too messy, just rotate the partitions you're working on, and this is where it helps to have them dyed different colors. Leave the house to reset everything back to its correct position, and now you can get a fresh start. Here you can see just the yellow and pink partitions need to go up a little higher. In order to see what we're doing, we're going to rotate these angled trim pieces out of the way. Now we can continue to loft the pink and yellow partitions. Once in place, we'll rotate to lock them in place and then return the angled trim partitions back to their proper rotation. Now that we have all that mess of white rectangular partitions in place upstairs, it's time to adjust the first white rectangular partition, the one that's dyed gray. It needs to come down a little bit so it sits just at the bottom of the angled trim lines. Back upstairs, the final white rectangular partition can be placed with grid snap on and lofted into place so it sits just above the angled trim lines. As always, remember to rotate to lock it in place. Now for the horizontal trim lines. We will place a wooden loft on a stage panel and place wooden showcases on the loft turned sideways. You can adjust the height by moving the wooden loft up or down on the stage panel to make sure the edge of the wooden showcase lines up with the top of the gray white rectangular partition and the bottom of the angled trim lines. First, we're focusing on lining up the far right bottom piece of trim. Once in place, we'll float it by turning off counter placement, clicking on the far right wooden showcase, and then hitting escape. Now, we'll focus on the middle bottom piece of trim, line it up, and float it. The last three showcases will go up top, just underneath the bottom edge of the red partition. That's it for all the technical stuff. The final touch comes with dyeing all the pieces. We'll start with removing the dye just for fun, and then we'll dye them to match the original design using ink blue on the wall sections and snow white on the trim sections. There you have it, a wallpaper accent wall for your Final Fantasy XIV house. We hope you found this video useful. For more Break It Down videos, house walkthroughs, and podcast episodes, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments what build you would like to see next. Until next time, happy housing!